And I'll call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Start with a roll call. Can you start, Mr. Riddell Williams?
Charles Riddell Williams, present.
David Cohen, present.
Jennifer Loman, present. Leah Mulhern, present.
Dan Schultz, present. Zachary Epps, present.
Joel Fishbein, present.
Julie Haywood, present.
Got it back. Thank you. And I need approval of the minutes of the last Finance Committee meeting. We should have received by email, so I have a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved. Leah Mulhern.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. Schleicher.
Thank you very much. I know how much everyone loves talking about finances, particularly school district finances. And I'm pleased to be here my first meeting tonight. Tonight, I was going to take a look at our preliminary results for the 21-22 fiscal school year, as well as provide some updates on the 2022-2023 budget that occurred over the summer. Take a very preliminary look at the Act 1 timeline and the budget process going forward, and discuss the timing of the June 30th, 2022 fiscal year ending audit. All right, so first, why don't we take a look at, and again, these are very raw and very preliminary numbers, where it looks like we are headed when we close out the 21-22 fiscal year. If you look on the revenue side, sorry, this mouse is very delayed. On the local side, we did significantly better than budget. A lot of that was due to the economic situation within the country, within the township, particularly local revenues, including real estate tax revenues, mercantile taxes, real estate transfer taxes, saw historic collections, earned income taxes, things that you would expect in a good economy. It is important to note, and we'll hit on the next slide, that real estate transfer taxes, some of these taxes are historic highs. It is anticipated we'll see that level of collection in the future. We hope so, but it doesn't seem likely with today's interest rate environment and home price environment. But for the time being, it was good to see it over 4% over collections in our local revenues. On the state side, some of our promised subsidies came in a little higher than were anticipated and were budgeted. And a lot of that has to do with the budget process, additional grants that come in after the budget is completed or during the budget process. In the federal side, our ESSER spending was up over the prior year. So most of these federal revenues are just a wash. We report the revenue, we report the expense. It is nice to get the money. It does handle some of our more extraneous and difficult issues. But these collections aren't necessarily reflected of future budgets. So overall, our total revenue collected was $120 million for the 21-22 school year versus $123 million was budgeted, and collection over budget of $5.4 million. On the expenditure side, when we break it down by object, the 100 to 200 level objects are salary and benefits, as you can see, make up the vast majority of the expenditures of the district. They came in well within our budget limit. On the 300 level category, you recall some of our real estate tax settlements that we recognized up here in our local tax revenues came with a price, and that was consulting service from Keystone Realty Advisors and their services in securing the settlements. That equates to approximately $500,000. We do have some levels of staff that are currently outsourced, and all of that outsourced staff falls in a 300 versus a 100 level category. 400 level objects, purchase property and services. A lot of the increase over our budget is a result of laptop purchases and other items we bought as a result of receiving ESSER money to purchase them. And on the 500 level, other purchase services, 500 level expenditures include everything from tuitions, charter school tuitions, to contracted carriers in our bus service. A lot of this $2 million we came in under budget is a result of our transportation expense and forced efficiencies through COVID, reduction in routes, reduction in length of routes. So the credit where it's due to our transportation department. Hopefully we'll continue to see this kind of savings in our transportation going forward. On the supply side, again, we have a lot of classroom supplies that we purchased through ESSER. We saw an increase in the level of supply of classroom supplies as a result of receiving that federal money. I do think there were some adjustments required on the federal side to match that spending. Again, these are very early and unaudited numbers. 800 level other objects, we do have some reclassifications to do with tuitions that belong up here at 300 tuition level. A lot of our special ed sentiments are classified on the 800 level, and they can get up into the 500 or 300 level expenditure category, and that equates to approximately $475,000 within this particular category. Our final category, 900 other financing items, that is principal on debt and any sort of transfer we might make out of the general fund. So in this particular category, we had a $2 million transfer out of our general fund into our cap reserve, and that was just to set money aside for future capital projects. That $2 million is not an ongoing expenditure. So when you factor in our total revenues over our expenditures, it's got a $2.5 million surplus. If you factor in the $2 million we transferred, we're at about a $4.5 million surplus. So very, very positive results for the 21-22 school year financially. Again, these are very raw numbers. We'll continue to make adjustments to them going forward. But I think the takeaway from tonight is we did have another solid financial year. We are moving towards structural stability in terms of revenues over expenditures on an annual basis, and that's where we absolutely want to be going forward. Taking a little closer look at some of those local revenues. If I look at the current year actual, and you look at this transfer tax, we collected $1.9 million in transfer taxes versus almost half of that the prior year. You can see our typical level of collection is right around the $900,000 million mark, and that was blown out of the water through the combination of high home prices and low interest rates. An environment we don't even see until September, interestingly enough, but this is a very positive result, something that we can stick in the bank at least for issues we have going forward. Earned income taxes, mercantile taxes, the same story, not quite to the degree of transfer taxes, but still historic levels of collections. All right, moving on to.
Do you want to stop there and ask for questions?
Sure. Any questions on the 21-22 financial results?
Just one quick regarding the transfer to the general fund. Is there like a general formula that was followed, or was that just a recommendation to transfer that amount?
So that money was transferred partially to offset some expenditures. We didn't have $2 million in expenditures. But anytime you have excess in your general fund, you try and identify what you need that excess money for. Capital expenditures and capital repairs to district facilities was identified. That money was moved into a specific fund for that purpose.
Just point of clarification for that question. The $2.3 million transfer was to the capital fund, not that. And the general fund got the rest of the surplus, which is another $2.8 million. Correct. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I said general fund initially.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
And just, I'll go around, sorry, an observation, but any other questions?
Go ahead.
I wondered about our charter school costs, what they ultimately ended up being from last year compared to what we've budgeted.
So I'm new enough that I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
Okay,
I do know that there was not a drastic drop in charter school expenses, still at higher than normal levels of cyber charter students, mostly in the cyber charter category. I don't know that that's a trend that will go away. Once individuals knew that they had that option, and they took the steps to plant their children in those programs, it's probably something that's going to take time.
What we can do is we'll pull the numbers and we can put that in a Friday board update.
oh, that would be
For the whole
great,
board.
thank you, yeah.
I have the information you're looking for on a spreadsheet at my desk, but I don't have it.
No worries, I just, it's kind of a question that always comes up, so. And I also just had another question, I'm sorry about, you had mentioned about in other objects, did I hear you say this right, that there was $475,000 for special education settlements?
When a special ed student is placed in a different facility, the expenditures for that facility, in essence, the tuitions are charged at 800 level. I believe they were budgeted for the 300 and 500 level, depending on the services provided. So that's just more of a reclassification, housekeeping issue, as opposed to reduction in expenditures.
So to answer your question, because I hear the underlying the question, it's placement as well as compliance.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because some of those could be simply what the IEP team decided, and that's what we're gonna pay for, and some of them are could be like,
So it's both. I just wanted to clarify.
okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, that is what I meant by that's settlement.
Okay.
Placement settlements all straps.
There was in the, I think it was, 300, you mentioned $2 million as part of, I heard technology updates like computers. Was that?
I'm sorry, 300 level?
Yeah, I think it was the 300 professional tech services. You mentioned there was about $2 million that was spent. And I heard computers, but I didn't hear, or did I mishear that?
It wasn't 200 million or 2 million. The 300 level, that was the real estate tax consulting services, Keystone with advisors, as well as when we outsource a position because that position's not filled, or we use a consulting agency to fill a position, it's charged at 300 level purchase services versus 100 or 200 salary benefits.
Gotcha. Okay.
But you did say something about computers, but I thought that was in the 400 level, and that was offset by ESSER funds that are in the top line, so it wasn't out of our normal budget. It was money that we got from the federal government for that specific purpose, and we spent it in the 400 level.
Gotcha.
Yes.
So, and it sounds like, okay, and so from what I heard, it seemed like that may have been, do we, actually, I'll preface it with, do we know like when some of that timing happens? Like this is related to tech. So this is related, because I thought you said it was related to tech, so it got my mind running. Do we know like when some of those costs might be higher or lower?
So when we receive the federal ESSER money, that opens up the window to purchase a lot more technology and a lot more items for our students.
Yeah.
And that money, up until a couple of years ago, was not on the horizon or anticipated. So when we receive the money, we have the opportunity to buy those items. That's why you see the increase in spending.
Yeah, so we won't have those ESSER money. We spent it and it's gone. And so, but let's say there's a cost associated. Let's say there's a cost associated to update our technology because students need new computers or we need new smart boards. The touchscreen isn't operating anymore. Like after 5 years, we know we're gonna have to spend like 1.5 million around technology. Like, is that a part of the calculus at all?
That should be built right into the budget, so you won't be seeing variances. You'll be seeing it just as a budgeted figure. So we have 4,000 students and buy 4,000 computers, and we cycle them out every 5 years. And we should be buying so many computers a year, and we should build that into our budget.
Okay, good. Thanks. I appreciate that.
And we do have a full replacement cycle for technology. So
yeah, so and that's good to hear because and some of this is because I think I misheard you. I thought you said we had to spend $2 million around that, and so I was like, it was unexpected. So appreciate you getting into that. The real estate transfer, similar question, but with obviously there were sales, like you mentioned, like unanticipated, right? A lot of sales in this area, and so that also slowed down. at a certain point, right? Interest rates are in a place, hopefully that changes at some point. But so is that expected where, yes, we had a boom, but we might expect that it might be under that 800, that normalcy over the next year, or is it like just let's wait and see approach?
Part of it is wait and see, but I think on this slide, we can go back and we can look in our collection for the past 5 years to kind of establish a baseline of what we anticipate collecting on any normal given year, and use that to develop our budget going forward. So but I think we'll have another $1.9 million year this year. Well, I hope so, but more than likely not. So going forward, we can use these historical figures and develop our expectation going forward.
Thanks.
Mr. Cohen.
Yeah, staying on real estate transfer tax, I could be wrong, but I believe, and this can happen any given year or not happen, I believe that what I still call Cheltenham Mall was sold during the last fiscal year, which obviously is a big property sale. And you may or may not have a big property sale, big property sales any given year. Going back to real estate as well, I know in the past we've not really been budgeting for some potential liabilities around some matters around reassessment, and the big one being Holy Sepulchre Cemetery. So I don't know if you're familiar with it, but are we now setting aside money in the budget or in some other way for some potential liabilities if things go the wrong way in terms of reassessment?
I think you're 3 weeks on.
I'm not trying to.
So that is a area that we work with Ed and our solicitors on,
Okay.
Which really keep us up to breast. So that is something that we do monitor. And I'm getting up to speed on those cycles as well.
Right. Briefly, Holy Sepulchre, we really got very lucky. I look at the reasons why. It was a process timing issue on the property owner's end, but otherwise we're looking at a big hit, which when you're saying, talking to Ed before, we've not really been planning for appropriately from a financial viewpoint.
Right, but that one sounds like we dodged a bullet.
We dodged a
Yeah, we
bullet
did.
this time.
Right. And he brought me up to speed, so I'm aware to what you're referencing.
Okay, but I'm just looking more to the future.
Oh, without a doubt.
Other things like that moving.
Right. And full transparency, that's also a situation with Cedar Brook, which we're still dealing with
Right, yeah.
litigation items there, and we're still dealing with the litigation item at the high school with the library. So those are things which is why we took $2 million to go towards capital expenditures, because there's some unforeseens, and there was some monies that Chuck set aside with Lou in anticipation of some of these future litigations that we have. So we'll keep you posted.
Thank you.
When we get to the end of the audit, if we do have a surplus, then again, we have to make a decision. What did we do with that surplus? Do we keep it in the general fund? Did we commit it to a specific purpose? Do we transfer it out for additional capital reserve? So close the audit. Another decision to make.
And I will jump in and say that you will see me as superintendent really doing a push towards the capital one. We are hoping, and I have Joshua, Mrs. Swigert working on this, the demographic study that was approved a while back will be approved by the MCIU September 14th. We're hoping, I think, November, December. Is that completion date about right? Potentially
Until November.
Okay, so November, I just want to check and verify, but there will be future implications based on what we learned from that study in terms of how we move forward. But I know one thing, which is really a non-negotiable at this time at the high school, we've got to figure out air conditioning, which is going to be a huge capital investment, not out of this world, but it's we can't continue with having no air at the high school. That's ridiculous. So it's things like that we'll be submitting proposals to the board for your consideration to bid out.
I'm sorry, you said the IU. Was it the IU or the County Planning Commission?
Or county planning.
Yeah, I'm sure 99% of the time it's the IU. But
Yeah, county planning. I'm going from off the top of the head, so yeah, we'll look out. So. we'll
Ms.
keep you
Haywood,
posted.
do you have a question?
Yes, a couple of questions. Mr. Swigert, I can't remember if we took any bond refinancing out last year. So did we realize any savings if we did? I don't see that anywhere here, but
Going back to this slide, some of that savings will be buried in the 8 and 900 between principal and interest. You see some more principal and some less interest paid. I don't have the exact savings off the top of my head.
okay.
I won't be using you as an excuse all the time. But unfortunately, this meeting, I don't have
That's
all that.
perfectly fine. I understand that. And then for the revenues themselves, can you identify a ballpark of the amount that is really non-renewable income or revenues for this year, for 22-23, that may be connected with ESSER funds or other grants that are, one-time influx of money in 21-22?
So there's a 3-year cliff. What I think would be beneficial, and I'm still wrapping my head around it because ESSER, that process started under the interim superintendent, and I kind of adopted it. And there's some things that we've been working through, but we can give you a breakdown ESSER-wise in terms of itemizing where monies have been allocated, and then when that sunshine or honeymoon period will end. So that'll give you as a full board a snapshot of what that ESSER cycle would look like.
Thank you. I'm asking that question because prospectively, for planning purposes, just knowing what's coming in, when it's coming in, and when we should not really be relying on those dollars, at what point going forward.
We still have a couple of years left, and I think anytime you get a one-time lump sum of money like ESSER, you want to ease into it and ease out of it is the best way to approach it so that you don't quite see that cliff. This next year will be where we should see most of our expenditures.
And we've used that money primarily to upgrade our technology, and also with supports for students around social emotional well-being and professional development. So it's not an area per se where we're going to be impacted from FTE or staffing perspective, but potentially from a resource perspective. But I'm hoping that we move out of this pandemic mindset to have more normalcy. But then we may need to shift though and look at, are there areas that we are going to have to increase FTE to make sure that we're still meeting the need? But our ESSER funds aren't tied towards anything that would put us in a compromising situation at this point.
So, I'm sorry, were you done, Julie?
I was, thank you.
To follow on that, we're currently contracting out a lot of the social and emotional stuff to Effective School Solutions. And that means that we haven't hired people and then we'll be in the position of having to lay them off when ESSER funds disappear. That's the point.
Correct.
But we should be, as a board, I think, thinking about the need to hire those people full-time FTEs, because that problem isn't going to go away. And but to your point, there needs to be a way to pay for it other than funds that aren't going to be available in those out years. Another observation is that we went into 21-22 expecting to use $465,000 of fund balance, and instead we had a surplus of over $5 million. So some of that was the $1 million in real estate transfer taxes we can't ever expect to see again. Some of that was ESSER's, but a lot of it wasn't. A lot of it was higher funding from the state that doesn't look like it's going to go away, and some of it was just better tax collections locally. So that's to me, the big picture, the big takeaway of this presentation.
I'll just add the transportation savings as well. Was
Yeah.
a huge chunk.
And that I can't get my head around. Why that was so much lower last year when we didn't have COVID interruptions is hard for me to fully comprehend, because I didn't think we did that good a job negotiating that contract, that it was that.
But you actually did. So that transportation contract was actually a contract that benefited us as a district. And after this year, we're going to see the flip of that in terms of an increase in what transportation expenditures are going to cost us. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I'll move on to the current year, year-to-date results, and year-to-date results versus the budget. I don't think at this point in time there is any reason to believe that our operating results will differ from the budget, as we barely have a month's worth of data. But I would like to highlight some changes that did come out from the state after our budget was passed. On July 8th, the state passed its final budget. And as part of that budget, it offered a higher basic education, special education subsidy. These are exact figures that were almost $500,000 greater than what we had budgeted, that were unanticipated. So I recorded that difference here. They also released a PCCD security and mental health grant to the tune of $329,000 that we could put towards directly towards helping mental health issues in our schools and physical security enhancements within our schools as well.
Any questions about that? I have one. Who else does? Is that in that number that's on the budgeted spreadsheet or not? 500.
That was not included in the budget. So these are additional funds that are available.
That does not have been added in to what we just saw. Okay.
Yes.
And again, that 300, the grant is more like ESSER funds. It's for a specific purpose. We can't expect it again. But the other two things are funding.
Correct, yes. So the PCCD grant is kind of has existed the past several years since Parkland. The PCCD has been offering security grants. It was kind of repurposed, remanufactured as security and mental health grant this year. Half going towards mental health, half going towards security purposes. That half towards mental health, again, towards additional resources, outsourced staff within our buildings. And then the other half, this physical security piece, going towards additional cameras, technological security equipment placed throughout our buildings as needed.
I.e. Elkins Park, who needs some serious attention. The back of Cedarbrook, where the basketball courts with no cameras. So we will give those specific updates as we roll out. I'm going to have to figure out a plan while Mr. Holman is out, because I do believe that he will be on extended medical leave. He had a surgery that had to occur. So I think he'll be out probably for about 6 weeks. So I've got to have a plan B. It's par for the course, right? This is the reality of what we deal with. But, that's why we didn't have the facilities aspect of this finance, but we're gonna have to pivot.
Question, how discretionary is the PCCD grant funds?
It came with a page of specific items that we had to spend.
Gotcha.
Okay. But broad enough.
Yeah, just really thinking through, like, what are the opportunities to have, like, participatory budgeting, like when we do have moments of discretion, when we can invite young people, community members into how we decide to use those funds. Doesn't sound like this is an opportunity. That's kind of
Unfortunately, we had a deadline of August 31st to get the grant submitted.
Yeah, no, that's with PCCD. It sounds like that's typically what they do. So yeah, just asking.
So we found out mid-July, you have to have all this money.
Yeah.
Specify a specific purpose within 6 weeks, which was a very quick turnaround.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I appreciate it.
Just briefly, with the high school education, not to have a long conversation about it, but I hope 2 points we consider. One is looking at the Inflation Reduction Act, where there might be some money available. I know there is money available for school buses, for electric school buses. And obviously, this is very nascent, it just came on recently. But also with air conditioning, trying to look at it through part of a sustainability lens.
The question Mr. Epps posed did also bring something to mind for me. That was that we did have conversations, at least, and I feel that we agreed on having participatory budgeting, or at least a function very similar to that when it came to our ESSER funds. I believe we were gathering feedback from the community and us about how to spend that, and I don't know if this is the point to be able to share an update there, but that did just bring to mind exactly that we did say that we were going to do that in some capacity.
Well, that was done for ESSER 3.
Okay.
And we can share the results of the feedback that we got from the community.
Yeah, for me, I think it would be important to know.
What I'm hearing tonight is everyone wants to see the multi-year budget, the multi-year spending to date, and the categories in which it was budgeted, so we can get that.
Thank you.
Would that be best done as a board update or a finance committee agenda item, do you think?
Finance
I
committee.
consider this.
It's probably.
Some I can do in board updates like what Jenny had alluded to. You know, the more complex, I think it would warrant being in this forum where we have a Q&A. Board updates, from my perspective, are just informational items which I'm answering a question that was posed to give clarity. So,
And then I have a question. Is this the last for the 2022-23 budget update?
Yes.
Do we have a sense roughly of the impact of the CEA contract on this year's budget? Is that, because that was in limbo when we passed the budget, and now we have final numbers.
I have a rough figure for you. There's some nuance with attrition, and we're still processing column movement.
So we can do that in a future.
Or that's.
That could also be
Yeah.
board
Yeah.
update.
Typically, all of the column movement and all of the step movement is entered and addressed in October. So I think that's to get a more solid concrete on this.
Anything else on the agenda?
Yeah.
Mr. Sligo, are you done? Okay.
I just have a few more. I'll go over it real quick. Looking forward at the budget, at the timeline of the budget, around January is when we have to make a decision about whether we're going to ask for any exemptions through the state to increase real estate taxes greater than our Act 1 index, which is the mandatory, or the cap on our tax increase limit. At this point, the Act 1 index is looking like it is going to be incredibly high, so I don't know that that would be necessary. We should have our 23-24 budget timeline already received and sent from the state. We don't have that yet for whatever reason, but they did push out PASBO pushed out a modeling of what we can anticipate the index to look like, which is going to be 5.2%. I'm sorry. This is a factor that goes into that Act 1 index, and that's the statewide average weekly wage from the unemployment comp data that they received. You can see it is quite an increase over prior years of 5.2%. And when we factor that into our Act 1 index calculation, the modeling is showing an index of 4.1% as a base index, which we usually receive the base index. So plenty of wiggle room this year to operate out of without requiring any sort of special exemption.
That was gonna be my question. Could you just give like a 30,000 foot view of what goes into that Act 1 calculation?
Sure. So this. Without reading into, these are actually the factors that go into that Act 1 count. That's the statewide average weekly wage
from the Department of Labor. So they look at what's being reported in terms of salary movement. They also look at the employment cost index, and they factor those two figures together and come up with an adjusted index, which is a reflection of cost of living, wage movement throughout the state, and that's how they come up with their base value for what school districts are allowed to increase their taxes. School districts that have below market value and personal income ratios will get an adjusted index. They'll be allowed to increase their real estate taxes. Higher than that, this base index, we're on the side where this is our max. This is typically our max, and it will probably be this way for a very, very long time unless they change the formula or the rules.
Thanks.
Just a question before I'm looking for an answer now, certainly, but looking at the taking of, are there different ways now that we have new leadership that we want to approach the budget process as an administration, also the relation of the board? I'm not saying we've done before was something I've not been happy with, but obviously it's a chance to maybe try to pivot and change in terms of the way the budget's developed by aid administration and also board engagement and maybe other engagement in that development process.
I think that that could be some Saturday dialogue that you can put under other. But I also know that that's why the timing of the strategic plan is going to be critical and what comes out of the action steps, because we definitely want to be able to align our 2022-2023 budget to what targets and resources we feel we need to move the needle with student outcomes. So some board members, I believe yourself included, are already a part of that process. So we can see what other enhancements we would need to make, but I'm open. I think it's a great idea, but I think this will give us our first opportunity to really see some alignment between our strategic planning and our budget. We didn't have that last year. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the budget timeline or anything we've discussed? Is that it?
Stop.
No, I'm letting you keep going, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, is there that community member?
Yes.
Oh,
Do you want to see if you have any questions or comments?
do you have any
No
questions?
questions.
Okay.
Maybe
Thank you.
next time.
And I don't, are there any community members on Zoom?
There's no one.
Okay,
Oh, there is one attendee, sorry.
so,
Yes, there is, Joel, there's one attendee.
and, can we,
This is an item that hasn't been discussed yet.
okay, go ahead.
This is my last slide, I swear.
Last slide, okay.
If anyone wants to talk social finances after the meeting, you're more than welcome to. So the anticipated completion date of our audit pool is the end of January, in line with our continuing disclosures for our bonds. This month, we expect audit field work. We expect to receive some draft numbers that are close to final by the end of October at the latest, in line with the submission of our annual financial report with the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So that's the general timeline of the audit. The one issue we have to deal with this year is the implementation of GASB 87, which is the conversion of our leases into a quasi fixed asset, a rate to use. That's really the only big auditing change this year, but I think we will easily be able to tackle it. And that is all I have. Thank you.
And I'll open it to the community. Who's running the Zoom?
I believe Joe or Chris.
I am, it's Chris, and that attendee is me testing as Chris from home. So,
Okay, so there are no attendee questions on Zoom, and our one in-person attendee doesn't have any questions. I think all of the board questions have been asked and answered. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Still moved. Zacharias.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Adjourned. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Be safe,
Bye,
everyone.
Julie.
Okay, thank you.
have a good night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Take care.